In defining Antichrist, we learn that Antichrists are those who deny the divinity of Jesus Christ or essential parts of his gospel. Before the time of Christ, the worship of the sun and the moon were the common forms of worship around the world, much of which found its way into America by seamen from other lands. For instance, in Barry Fells, America, BC, we learn that as far back as 1000 BC, Celtic mariners arrived from across the Atlantic. In the course of time, they colonized areas from the West Indies northward to New England, where they built villages and temples, raised Druid circles, and buried their dead. Other foreign mariners arrived at various times thereafter. Thus the Nephites and Mulekites were not the only people in the land when they first arrived, having settled the land they called Zarahemla, not far from the hill Cumorah itself in western New York. It's in this region the saga played out in the Book of Mormon took place, although chiefly in western New York, where all the geographical descriptions noted in the Book of Mormon can be reconciled with the landscape as it appeared 2,000 years ago perfectly. As it turns out, it was the people from the neighboring mound-building regions that arrived in Zarahemla from time to time who were the Antichrist, for the entire mound-building culture of the Northeast was based on sun worship. In Barry Fells, America, BC, we learn that the Ogham-type writing found on the tablets they left in Maine are incontestably linked to Ireland, where many of the tribe of Dan lived, the first in Israel to take to idol worship and thus ultimately separating from Israel and taking to the sea. By following the scripts they left behind, which Barry Fell then translated, it appears that Phoenician ships brought a number of Celts and Iberian traders across the sea, where they settled along the New England coast, and then westward through Pennsylvania into West Virginia, Tennessee, and Kentucky, where a large sun-worshipping population grew. A script found among the skeletal remains of the Grave Creek Mound in West Virginia, once deciphered, tells us that the men interred there were Phoenician navigators, with a script found written in Punic Phoenician, which modern language scholars confirm can be tied to the Celtic and 2nd century BC Hebrew Phoenician language. An identical tablet was also found in West Virginia, with another in Tennessee and a third in Ohio, where they have been associated with large burial mounds resembling those found in Iberia during the Bronze Age. With the sun-worshipping Celtic tribes moving closer and closer, and in consequence of continual conflict with their Lamanite brothers, sometime between 279 and 130 BC, the Nephites moved north into western New York and merged with the Mulekites in Zarahemla. The archaeological record shows the Mulekites settled both western New York and lower Ontario, where the Algonquin language originated. Now, the archaeological record shows that around 100 BC, some of the Mulekites in Ontario began to move south into Ohio. Archaeologists are of the opinion that the Adena culture in Ohio was so attractive to the people in the north that there was an actual movement of some of them southward. The arrival of the Mulekites in Ohio added such a fluorescence to the local Adena populations that archaeologists began to refer to this merged culture as the Hopewell, after a farm where some of their artifacts were found. Once the sun-worshipping Celtiberians entered Ohio, the Hopewell culture changed again, with great ceremonial centers aligned to the sun and the moon and stars now beginning to dot the landscape. The Celtiberians and their Druid priests began the construction of great ceremonial centers based on the alignment of the stars, something the Druids were especially known for. In all, Druidic knowledge consisted of natural history, astronomy, mathematics, geometry, medicine, jurisprudence, poetry, and philosophy, with philosophy and astronomy practiced with rigid exactness. Please do not be confused in your thinking regarding these magnificent ceremonial centers, which some have suggested were Nephite temples. They have been identified as lunar observatories, which S.D. Peet and others cite as similar structures in Celtic Britain and Ireland, where their Druid priests were expert in astroarchaeology. The Druid priests the Phoenicians always brought with them may well have been the Antichrist noted in the Book of Mormon, for they continually challenged the very heart of the Christian faith. The men of the Druidic order took on the roles of priests, teachers, lawyers, and philosophers, many of the same professions noted among those who espoused the order of Nahor in the Book of Mormon. And it came to pass that the 93rd year did also pass away in peace, save it were for the Gadianton Robbers who dwelt upon the mountains, who did infest the land. For so strong were their holds and their secret places that the people could not overpower them. Therefore they did commit many murders and do much slaughter among the people. More than one archaeologist has noted a tie between the Ohio Hopewell population and certain Celtic tribes who settled in West Virginia, Tennessee, and Kentucky, and from there ultimately into New York. Well, the Nephites managed to contain the Gadiantons for a while, although not without difficulty, for they had secret places to hide in the mountains. Gadiantons, who received their secret oaths and covenants from the devil himself, will almost prove the entire destruction of the entire Nephite nation. While the Gadiantons continued to be a threat to both the Nephites and Lamanites, the Nephites, who out of sheer fear began to listen to their prophets and repented of their sins, and thus enjoyed a short period of peace as they looked forward to the prophesied coming of Jesus Christ, the Son of the living God. And just as prophesied, the signs and wonders began to be fulfilled, all of which were designed to announce the birth of the Son of God. As the signs and wonders continued, the Nephites rejoiced and praised the Lord, and peace prevailed throughout the land. But sadly, only for a time, for just 9 years later the Nephites were steeped in wickedness again, with many joining the wicked Gadianton Robbers, whose leader Gadianton demanded that the Nephites give up their lands or perish. And notwithstanding the threatenings and the oaths which Gadianton had made, behold, the Nephites did beat them, and it came to pass that Gadianton was overtaken and slain, and thus was the end of Gadianton the robber. And things got so bad that the government itself was overthrown, and the people divided into tribes. Thus a cleansing was needed. Major earthquakes, tempests, fires, whirlwinds, and physical upheavals of all kinds fell upon the Nephites at the time of the Savior's death. Then, wonder of wonders, the Savior Jesus Christ appeared above them in a heavenly light, and a voice was heard saying, "Behold my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased, in whom I have glorified my name. Hear ye him." And the Lord came down and walked and talked among them and taught them of his Father's kingdom. With the visit of Jesus Christ to America after his death and resurrection, peace entered the land, and a new religious fervor was initiated which lasted for 200 years. During this period of peace, the Nephites and Lamanites walked the land freely, and the Hopewell trade network flourished and spread from the Great Lakes to the Gulf Coast. As we continue on with the long history of the Nephites, we learn that after about 2 centuries, divisions, false churches, and persecution began to arise in Zarahemla again. The scriptures tell us that it was the rising generation who succumbed to the decadent ways of the Antichrist in the area, who were even practicing human sacrifice, an evil which ultimately brought down the wrath of God on the whole area, starting with the Hopewell. And since the Lamanites were proving to be more righteous than the Nephites, the Lord used the Lamanites to clean house. Thus around 350 A.D., the Iroquois and their southern Cherokee brothers, both of which worshipped the Great Spirit above all, and had enough of their decadent ways, began to cleanse the land of the Hopewell, with those not killed in battle sent on a long migration into Mexico. By 385 A.D., they turned on their own Nephite brothers, all too many of which had also embraced the wicked ways of the Gadiantons. Thus they disappeared as well in a war of complete extermination, with the Lamanites coming out the victors. Only Moroni was left after that terrible battle at Cumorah, who then wrote the account of that terrible time in history on golden plates for those of our day. 1,000 fortified sites were found around the hill Cumorah, 500 of them in Monroe County alone, the place of the hill Cumorah. In the documentary History of the State of New York, E.B. O'Callaghan sums it up surprisingly well, stating, "Who then wrought these works? They were done by the hand of man, there is no doubt, but by whom and when and for what purpose remains at present an inexplicable enigma. What has become of these people, and why have we no histories of such a nation as must have inhabited this part of the earth? Probably if a knowledge of these ancient people is ever obtained, it will be derived from inscriptions on stone or metal which have withstood the rust of time." How right he was!